Hi, I'm Doug Black. I'm editor-in-chief at Inside HPC. And today at Virtual SC20, I'm with Martijn de Vries. He is Chief Technology Officer at Bright Computing, the high-performance cluster management software company. Martijn, welcome.
Thanks.
All right, thanks for joining us today. So I understand at SC20, you'll be putting a spotlight on Bright's clusters as a service technology. Could you give us an overview of Bright's solutions in this area?
Sure. So clusters as a service is a technology that we developed several years ago, primarily for Azure and AWS. So it basically allows you to spin up a Bright cluster inside of a cloud, such as Azure and AWS. So we also have complementary technology that allows you to extend an on-premise cluster into AWS or Azure, but that's not what this is about. So in the case of cluster as a service, everything is running in the cloud. And yeah, doing that is actually pretty easy. So it just takes a couple of minutes to create a cluster inside of the cloud, and you can do your work and then terminate it again once you're done. So clusters essentially become a disposable object. Inside of the cluster, we are basically interacting with the AWS or Azure APIs in order to spin the cluster, to spin up more nodes inside of the cluster or terminate nodes, so you can scale it down very easily and scale it up very easily as well. So the big new thing that we did with 9.1 is we made it possible to also use this technology with VMware vSphere. So now you can spin up Bright clusters inside of your own private clouds that are being run through VMware.
Okay, so for folks working in highly demanding HPC or machine learning workload scenarios, how is the give us a scenario of how the capability would be used?
Yeah, so there's several ways in which several scenarios for which this is very useful. So, for example, if you have groups of users that you want to keep apart from each other, you could now very easily create a separate cluster for each group of users. And manage it as an individual cluster. So if you have multiple groups of users that don't need to be aware of each other and you put them on a multi-user cluster, then that can be quite dangerous, because it's very easy for people to see each other's jobs and perhaps to see bits and pieces of data floating around inside of a cluster. So if you want to do proper separation, then it's a good idea to create separate clusters for these different groups of users. Another reason why it can be a good idea to run your clusters inside of VMware, for example, is if you have spare cycles that you may want to use during the night. So a VMware infrastructure may be busy serving users' desktops during the day, but at night that capacity is unused. And what's pretty typical about HPC is that there's always an appetite for more capacity. So you could very easily scale up a virtualized Bright cluster inside of VMware and let it take advantage of that excess capacity that you may have during the night. Another use case scenario is power users. So you typically don't want to give a power user access to a shared cluster. So a power user may want to have administrative access for various reasons. And this allows you to spin up a private cluster for that particular user, and they can do whatever they want without getting in the way of anybody else.
Okay, thanks. So these forms of clusters as a service that talking about, they really rely on virtualization. And as I understand it, HPC sites sometimes aren't so eager to use virtualized platforms. How do you overcome or deal with that issue?
Yeah, we think it's become less of an issue in recent years. So you have to keep in mind that when you're running in the cloud, it's pretty much always virtualized. So even in the case of AWS or Azure. So in the case of VMware, I know that they've put in a lot of effort over the years to really minimize the degradation of performance. So how much degradation you're going to see depends a bit on the type of workload. So if it's heavily involved in communication, then it may be a little bit higher than if it's than other types of workload. But it can be as low as 2% performance degradation, for example. So yes, you're losing some performance, but you get some benefits in return. So the trade-off, between performance penalty and the flexibility benefits that you get from running in a virtualized platform is something that every organization will have to decide for themselves on. What's also interesting is the work that NVIDIA has been doing with their DPUs and VMware adopting those in order to offload the hypervisor on the SmartNIC. So this is technology that will be coming probably over the next year, but I'm pretty excited to be able to reap the benefits of having a hypervisor without losing performance to the hypervisor on the node. So it'll be pretty much like running on bare metal.
Okay, Martin. Well, you mentioned 2021. Looking ahead to next year, what else might we see from Bright in the as a service area?
Yeah, in terms of cluster as a service, there's really not that much more to do. Once you have the capability to spin up Bright clusters in cloud environments, then you're pretty much done. But the only thing that we'll likely do in the cluster as a service area is add other cloud providers. So there's a big one that's missing right now, and that's Google. So we will likely implement support for Google Compute Engine at some point. And in terms of VMware, the next step really is to support cluster extensions. So that is the ability to take an on-premise or actually a physical cluster and be able to extend that into a VMware infrastructure. So we'll likely be delivering that somewhere over the next year.
Okay. Well, great. Great update. Thanks so much for that. And best of luck to you and to Bright Computing at the conference this week.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.